Hey everybody, it's Travis coming at you with another episode of Tales from the Man Cave. Tonight I want to hit on some television shows that I used to watch back in my youth. The first show I want to hit on is the original Batman that aired from 1966 to 1968 with Adam West as Batman and Burt Ward as his faithful sidekick Robin. Now I know I was born in 1983, just a few years after the last episode aired, but it was in syndication on the Family Channel back in the late 80s and early 90s. I heard that it came on MeTV in the evening time now, but unfortunately we don't get that channel. I always wanted a red phone like Bruce Wayne and Commissioner Gordon had. And the bust of William Shakespeare was a nice touch as well, with that lifted up to expose the button for the bat pole. My favorite thing about the whole show is that everything was labeled, such as utility bat pole and the bat computer. I wonder if the toilet paper even had labels on it. I wanted his utility bat belt. It had all the necessary gadgetry needed at the time to fight crime. I was fortunate enough to get to sit in the model of the original Batmobile in Gatlinburg. Now I couldn't resist saying, batteries to full power, turbines to speed. My first wife didn't have a clue as to what I was talking about. Maybe that was a sign that we shouldn't be together. Never trust anyone that doesn't enjoy Batman. Now I joke when I say this, but I knew that Beth was the one the first night I spent the night with her. She was in a Batman nightshirt. She knew the way to a man's heart. Now here's another blast from the past. Does anyone else remember the cartoon Brave Star? It seems like I'm the only one in my circle that remembers the show, but I remember it coming on WGN. It was about a Native American marshal and his mechanical horse 3030. It was set in the future and the place was called New Texas. His arch nemesis Tex Hex was always trying to steal a gem called Carium. At the end of every episode it had a moral of the story type thing, almost like in G.I. Joe. I had several hours of episodes recorded on VHS and all the action figures, and I even had the blaster. One show that my parents and my grandparents could not stand was Pee-wee's Playhouse. I don't think anyone's parents enjoyed that show. I tortured them every Saturday morning with it. I know that at one point in time it came on Netflix, and I was super excited to take a stroll down memory lane with that one. I even introduced my 5-year-old to it at the time. I gotta admit, it wasn't as glorious as I remember it. But like her father, she enjoyed it, and I had no problem with it. Aside from what Paul Reubens did in the public years ago, I don't see it as anything to keep my child from watching. It had a few adult jokes inserted here and there to keep parents pacified. Not long after Pee-wee's Playhouse went off the air, professional wrestling came on, so it was like a reward to the parents for putting up with mindless drivel. Who else remembers the Nickelodeon show Doug? That was one of my favorites. Well, one of my favorites that I was allowed to watch. My parents were kind of strict about what I watched on television. More to come on that in just a minute. Back to Doug, the sweater vest, Chuck Taylor wearing good guy. I was just watching him on TV not long ago. Now that we have satellite, I have Nick Splat and Nick on Demand. I always liked watching Doug. He was a daydreamer just like myself. Whenever he found himself in a pinch, he would imagine himself as Quailman, a fictional character that he created. And if it wasn't Quailman, it was always Smash Adams, a comic book character that he created. At the end of each episode, he would write down the day that he had in his journal. I always wanted to keep one of those, but I never really got around to doing it. In a way, this podcast is my way of journaling, so stick around, you might find some interesting stories about myself. Rugrats was another favorite of mine. It featured 4 talking babies and an obnoxious toddler. The misadventures of Tommy, Chucky, twins Phil and Lil, and Angelica originally aired in the 90s. I remember when it first aired, I had a friend named Michael, had a conniption fit over the name of the show. He just kept saying, it's just wrong, they're calling the little babies rats. I think eventually he got the picture that the children were not being called rats, but they were being called Rugrats. It was the longest-running Nicktoon on Nickelodeon, airing from 1990 to 2004, until SpongeBob SquarePants came along in 1999. SpongeBob SquarePants is another favorite of mine, with his slightly dim-witted sidekick Patrick Star. I've always been a fan of adult humor, and this show is chock full of that. I remember one particular episode, SpongeBob forgot how to make a Krabby Patty, and it threw him all in a tizzy. One morning as he was getting ready for work, he put his underwear on his head, and with his nose still sticking straight out, well, I don't have to explain that one, I'll just leave it at that. On one episode, where his friend Sandy is about to go into hibernation, she decides she has to do all these extreme activities before going to sleep. She has SpongeBob accompany her, and the soundtrack was pure metal. They had the Cowboys from Hell themselves, Pantera. There were no lyrics, just teeth-grinding metal riffs. That was probably my all-time favorite episode, because if you know me, I'm a huge fan of metal. Now going back a few years, I was really big into Mike Judge's Beavis and Butthead. That's the show I said my parents wouldn't let me watch. Well, much to their chagrin, I watched it almost every time it was on. I always loved when they watched music videos and made fun of them. On my favorite episode, Woodshop, the boys basically destroy the classroom furniture by putting it through a table saw. When they run out of things to chop up, Beavis decides to stick his finger into the moving blade. As they're sitting in the emergency room, when he gets the finger reattached, he is told not to use it for a certain amount of time. Well, he can't keep it out of his nose, and it gets stuck, and it comes off again. I remember being so fascinated with that show in the 7th grade and on up, that I was drawing them constantly in school. I've even been told that I do a decent impression of Tom Anderson, their half-blind neighbor who is always having them do chores for him. Thanks to a good friend of mine, Corey, I now have the best of Beavis and Butthead on DVD. Talk about a walk down memory lane. I know I'll get some flack for liking this filth, but that's between me and my creator. That's about all the time I have for this one. So until the next time, good night and God bless.